Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Second Nature, Living with Ecological Grief and Loss. We have another amazing show and an amazing person and guest, and I'm so excited to have this conversation. I'm really excited to introduce you to Dr. Sarah Jaquette Ray, and she works at the intersection of social justice and climate emotions, which is something that we've been talking about throughout this series. She's an interdisciplinary environmental humanist, and really brings a whole range of disciplines and epistemologies and research into the service of climate justice. And in particular, her work really blows open how we understand climate emotions and climate justice. She's the author of 3 books, including The Ecological Other, Environmental Exclusion in American Culture, which is all about the illogic and affects of social control and environmental thought. She's the author of A Field Guide to Climate Anxiety, How to Keep Your Cool on a Warming Planet, which I highly recommend, and an exciting new book called The Existential Toolkit for Climate Justice Educators, How to Teach in a Burning World. And we are going to be talking about this new book a lot today. Sarah is interviewed and published widely. You've probably seen her articles and heard her media all through North America and, of course, around the world. She really does a lot of advocacy and outreach and teaching and learning in this area. And also, she's a certified mindfulness teacher through the UCLA Mindfulness Awareness Research Center. And that's something that has been continually coming up in some of these conversations. So really looking forward to digging more into that. On a personal note, I have been such a fan of Sarah's work and really love her readings. She really pushes the boundaries with that interdisciplinary and has a lot to teach us all. But in particular, and of late, her work as how to better equip educators, particularly teachers and professors, around how to teach this in a way that supports healing, that supports wellness, but also supports actions. So Sarah, welcome to Second Nature. This is such a pleasure and privilege to have you here today.
That was my pleasure. Thanks so much, Ashlee.
Okay, so talk to me about your journey. How did you end up doing this incredible work that you're doing? And how did you end up blending all of these different backgrounds and disciplines to start in this climate, emotion, mental health space and your work in ecological grief and anxiety?
This is an ongoing journey. I keep having to touch back into the why of everything often. So it's not a tie in a pretty bow, all bowed up. But I think part of a long-standing thread for me is that I've never really liked to be contained by disciplines, and I've always been really interdisciplinary. I remember the first time I ever liked college or academics or the world of the mind was when I could put together a paper that tied together 4 of the 4 different classes I was taking my senior year of college. And I thought, oh, religious studies, art, English, and I can't even remember, women's studies. These 4 different disciplines with completely different professors, completely different syllabi. It was like the highest high for me to find some argument that I was passionate about that pulled together from all 4 classes. So yeah, this desire to draw connections between disparate ways of thinking, to put together ideas in original ways, to come up with new ideas has always been a big why for me, but in service always for me has been social justice. So even in college, I was thinking to myself, how is all of the stuff that I'm studying? Religion was actually my major. And I was thinking very much about religion as a kind of service, as a kind of love, of a sort of activism. How does religion motivate people to have the kind of moral compass to do the kind of right work that's needed in the world? And then I also minored in women's studies, and I was really interested in thinking particularly about systems of oppression, specific systems of oppression like colonialism, white supremacy, patriarchy, and all the rest. And so combining these two I wasn't quite there yet in college. Nobody was helping me do that. And so I got into graduate school in American studies thinking, oh, American studies is really undisciplined and you can pull together all the disciplines, and the curriculum basically says, yeah, you have a couple core classes in American studies, but you can take classes all over the campus at UT Austin. And I thought, oh, that's what I'm talking about. Let me pull together these ideas in the ways that I want to. So interdisciplinarity was always a methodology for me, an instinct of how to think and how to engage intellectually. And also, I wanted to make an argument, and I finally feel like in my late in my career, I can finally make the argument that there's a deep relationship between interdisciplinarity and social justice, that the ways of thinking that have been blessed by the dominant Western colonial systems of higher education oftentimes preclude or exploit or just ignore different types of ways of thinking or epistemologies, and do epistemicide, violence against different types of epistemologies on purpose. And so ways of thinking that to push the edges of that, or come, from the bottom up, or from the outside, or from the margins, or however you want to think about it, are more likely to make their way into critical thinking if you're in an interdisciplinary space. And so I started to be able to link social justice questions to interdisciplinarity. But to the point of where did it take me into this mental health journey is a whole other question. So it was really my students. Sometime around 2013, I had just moved from University of Alaska Southeast to Cal Poly Humboldt and was leading an environmental studies program in both places. And there was something shifting in our students, and you probably felt it too. And educators who are listening, who have been teaching that long, may have noticed a similar shift. Something was going on. And now we've got Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation, that's just come out, and all kinds of people want to speculate about what's wrong with these people. It's kind of a perennial refrain. It's just, kids are weird these days. What's wrong with them? I was noticing a shift. I was having that, like, either it's my perception or it's something's happening with them. And I really wanted to listen to them and hear what they were needing. And my ability to teach them was starting to get diminished. My ability to deal with their overwhelm, my own burnout from my career, my desire to get tenure, having 2 little kids at home, what was happening in the world, all of this stuff was bearing down on all of us. And I think we were kind of in this boiling pot together and trying to figure things out. And I realized I had kind of an epiphany that many educators, I think, are either having now or have had in the last 10 years, which is that what we were trained to do in our PhDs, interdisciplinary or not, did not equip us for the existential calling, the work that young people are being tasked to do, given the state of the world that they're coming of age into. And it really made me think, as educators, we really need to ask seriously, what are we doing here? What are we doing with these students? Are they just empty vessels that we go take our PhD content and fill them up with in the Paulo Freire model of the banking model of education? Or are we trying to do something transformational here that sort of saves the world or helps the world or is of service in some way against even the ways that higher education is oppressive? Are we going to do something sort of radical here? And that really shifted all my attention to my students' mental health and the sort of larger structural causes of inflammation in younger people. And I don't mean inflammation just in the kind of physical way, I mean in the psycho-immunoneurological way, the sort of socio-ecological, psychological, nexus where all of these things are happening. I love this book, Inflamed, and a lot of people are actually starting to scientifically study how social politics can have traces in our bodies, which is no duh. But, our young people are litmus tests for what's happening in the world. And I thought I needed to write a book for my students. And I turned my attention entirely to this world of climate emotions. There was research starting to happen in the world of climate emotions, which you were a major groundbreaker for that work, Ashlee. You were one of very few people who were out there trying to figure out what is going on with the relationship between what's happening in the planet and what's happening with people's mental health. And I wanted to specifically translate all the research that I could find on this for the college-age students, my students, because those were the people I was thinking about. And that's where a field guide to climate anxiety came out of, that desire to do that. And again, I would never have had the courage to even think about doing that if I weren't already interdisciplinary and I had been trained in a way that said, go out and find whatever the tools are to figure whatever problem is in front of you that you want to address. And so that's kind of how I approached that book. Yeah, and so that's where my attention to this has gone. And quite frankly, Ashlee, it's been such a whirlwind. And I had no idea that the youth climate strikes around the world were going to happen in 2019 when I started writing this book. The book came out in 2020. I was still in page proofs when Greta Thunberg and everybody else was going going out and striking for the climate in 2019. And then, of course, COVID and George Floyd and all kinds of things happened literally as the book came out. And so this sense that young people and the rest of us need some inner skills that dominant media and dominant culture and capitalism are not offering for us is really where I've turned all my attention.
Mm-hmm. And I'm so glad you've turned your attention to that, because I find, well, and I mean, you talk about this, you focus on youth and students, but also the educators themselves who are struggling so much as well. And even people who maybe haven't previously come across the climate, emotion, social justice sphere are feeling it innately. And when they're going in the classroom and they're watching their students and they're trying to figure out how to have these conversations and share knowledge and design curriculum, but then not knowing how to attend to the deep emotions that people are experiencing, and the dispossession and the apathy that's driven not by not caring, but by caring too much, because it's just so much. And without those climate coping skills and the social justice coping skills and just everything that is happening right now. I mean, in the subtitle of your new book around like a burning world, because it is burning in so many different ways. And I find it's interesting that your journey really stemmed from students expressing need. And a lot of my own research really came out of communities expressing need and saying, like, we're already feeling this and we're already experiencing it. But then I did notice that shift as well in the classroom, and students just saying, like, how can you keep dumping all of this stuff on us that's so terrible? Like, all the students in environmental studies and international development and enviro-sci, like all these areas, all like every class is doom and gloom. and then they're just sent on their way, after their class. It's like, okay, well, goodbye. And they just, it's too much all the time. And they're only in that area because they love it so much. So then they're sort of doubly hurt around, they're so open to it and they're so passionate about it. And then it's so crushing. And, I find so many students now are passionate about it, but shying away from studying it at school because they think it's going to be too much. Yeah. And that is really hard, because you want passionate people in the field training to do these wonderful, wonderful things in the world. So
yeah, it was exactly that backfiring that you're describing that made me think, oh no, this isn't going to save the world. A whole generation of apathetic, nihilistic young people stepping into leadership and into adult life in a state of despair and apathy. I saw the specter of that and I thought, no.
Yes. Yeah. And you can't blame them for it, because everything has been structured to create and promote and encourage that they have these feelings and no coping skills, because not really many people know how to cope with what's happening right now in the world. So it's not that there's these positive role models kind of all over the place for young people to look to and say, oh, okay, this is how we deal with the next mass extinction and catastrophic failings and degradation of environment. It's just not there for them yet. So they're trying to sort of grapple with that, as many of us are. I mean, I still feel very woefully unequipped to deal with the emotions that I'm experiencing, and, let alone sort of being able to support others through that as well.
Yeah. And I remember somebody early on in this inquiry for me, when I was first toying with this idea of the book, I thought, okay, I'm going to talk about young people and how despairing they are. They can't even get to class. They're never going to save the world. They're not going to have careers. I had this sense of crisis, right? This imminent crisis of this generation. And somebody said to me, well, how is that any different than, my generation? I'm a child of the Holocaust exile, or my parents asking me the same question. Well, what about Vietnam? And there's always been a crisis, right? And I've also appreciated the perspective of Indigenous folks saying, this crisis started in 1492, Sarah, So this kind of sense of what Marianne East Heglar calls existential exceptionalism, where people are saying, is this the biggest crisis? Is this the biggest existential threat? No, people have had existential threats before. It depends on what community you're in, or, sort of trumping each other, competing with each other over which community can say that this is the greatest existential threat. And I appreciate that conversation. I think it's an important one to have. But I also do think that climate change does pose I sort of started looking for evidence to make the case that climate change was uniquely unique in history. How is climate change uniquely a bigger existential threat in history than any of these other ones that people have rolled out for me to make the case? And I think I did come to the conclusion that climate change is uniquely threatening and existential, and that the tools, as you just mentioned so beautifully, Ashlee, the tools haven't been invented yet. How we're going to deal with this. So, yeah.
Yeah, and the like a lot of the work within the Indigenous spheres that I do too, people always talk about that there's been many world-ending moments, and that that all of those things have happened, and there's been terrible tragedy and trauma, as you said, from 1492 earlier, and now climate change is integrating new traumas and new threats, and also sort of amplifying previous experiences that people have. And so seeing it as both a distinct threat, but not the only threat and not the only thing that's happened in history, but then trying to figure out, like, this is such a human-wide, species-wide, world scale tragedy of huge proportions, that how do we kind of learn from all of the other world-ending things that have happened, and how do we apply it within this, but in ways that actually can support and motivate people, rather than just the complete, as you said, nihilism and apathy that comes from just being so overwhelmed that it's such a huge topic and people are struggling so much with it. Yeah, I really want to talk, Sarah, about your new book that's just come out, because I think it's so timely. And we've been having conversations on this show around how do you equip people to really deal with this, both young and all ages. And in your new book, you have this line in the blog where you're sort of introducing it, and you say it's no longer morally or strategically appropriate to berate students with dire forecasts and reports of the sixth great extinction, to teach case studies of slow violence and ecological destruction, or present problems so deep and entrenched that solutions appear elusive. With students coming into the classroom already aware of how bad things are, the old model of scaring them into caring is no longer working. And that so resonated with me as someone who, has seen that in students, but also really studies different forms of pedagogies and different forms of how we learn and what we know, and institutional shifts and structures. And I think that this jumping off point, that the old model of scaring them into caring is no longer working, also ties into, like, how are institutions even serving students for all the things, for climate change, for social justice, for service, for transformational change. And I really want to talk about your book and dig in and hear sort of what led you to kind of do this, what your kind of key learnings are from it, what you've been really reflecting on. And I know it's really new, and we're going to put the information in the show notes. So I encourage everyone to go in and access it and explore this really important work.
Yeah, thanks. So this book was a brainchild of a couple of people. And so Jennifer Atkinson is my co-editor for the book, and Ellen Kelsey was a major part of it. Other people who've been kind of swirling around this co-creative thing are Panu Pikala out of Finland, Leslie Davenport, Blanche Verley in Australia, Jade Sasser at UC Riverside. So there's been kind of a group of people who've been really thinking. Dan Suarez at Middlebury. There's some people who are really caring about this question, and Jen Atkinson and I were trying to get those people together to say, what are the best practices that you have? What are you doing with this problem in your classes? So we wanted to sort of stage a conversation among faculty who are having the same kind of wake-up call and think through, what are they doing? How are they responding? How are they reinventing themselves? And can we accelerate and also share resources? And so that started as a Rachel Carson Center workshop in 2020, in the summer of 2020, which we then at the last minute had to cancel the physical meeting of it. But that was a sort of a blessing in disguise, as many of these weird COVID meetings were, because instead of just being able to pay for a handful of people, a dozen people to meet together in Munich, we were able to open up the whole thing to all the people who contributed or applied. And we ended up having a 3-day event with people from something like 20 countries or something. It was really extraordinary. And
wow,
that launched, it was really cool. In July of 2020, this launched a network of people, a discussion group for about a year that met every month over Zoom during all this COVID time, and just found company in people talking about these questions. It wasn't necessarily everybody's research topic to think about how do you deal with climate emotions in pedagogy, but everybody was coming up against these things in their classes. And of course, COVID had this additional layer of this, and we were all scratching our heads thinking, COVID is asking us to have the kind of, I don't know, resilience is the right word, but the kind of inner skill set that we've been researching about climate change needing from us. So here's the test case, and how are students doing? Not well, not well, and we're not doing well. So it was an important sort of support network for each other during a not well period. Case study, sort of a taste of climate change. And also during this time, we had in California, a lot of us were, in Australia, a lot of people were having students encountering all kinds of wildfire problems. We had people in different parts of the world saying, here's what my students are encountering, and this is how it's connected to climate distress. So there was a real sense of global coming together around, this isn't just an isolated geographical thing, which was kind of an amazing experience. And then the desire of the group was to put together a book. And so Jennifer and I put together a call, and a lot of the people who are in the book weren't necessarily part of the discussion group. And we just put together whoever came through and trying to build out this group of people who are talking about these things. And the book is a compilation of about 30 different things. And the organization, I think, is really cool. We have it organized by themes, but we have alternative indexing. So if you're looking for a particular emotion, skills and practices or essays about a particular emotion, you can look up guilt or fear or anger and go to those particular emotions. Or if you're looking for a particular methodology or discipline or type of text genre, if you're kind of a literary person, there's a lot of people who submitted have a sort of a literary or humanities background. So the book includes things that are like, if you are going into class at an hour and you just want to pick something up real quick, you can go find a plug and play quick thing. Or there's deeper pedagogical theoretical sort of treatises that say, here's how we should think about, the role of fear in the classroom or whatever. So this wide range of types of pedagogy are in there, which is really cool. So we wanted it to be really useful. And we also have practitioners in both activist spaces and therapeutic spaces kind of weighing in on what is the therapeutic or the climate psychology perspective on how all the stuff that climate psychologists are thinking about applies to higher education, the translation essays, which I think is really helpful. And so part of the reason why we put together that book in the first place was because it was clear that teachers and instructors from K through 20, or whatever you want to call it, K through 12, K through 16, grad professors, everybody that I would talk or, I'd give these book talks on a field guide to climate anxiety, and people would say, how does that apply to this age? How does this apply to my 15-year-old? How does this apply to, help me understand my XYZ aged person, whether you're a parent or a grandparent or a guardian or a teacher. And I started to realize that an applied text that took the work of a field guide to climate anxiety and applied it to the pedagogical context more specifically as a tool for educators was really called for. And I even spent some time working with a colleague of mine named Kevin Gallagher to put together something that we called the Climate Wisdom Lab, which was like a professional development training for Centers for Teaching and Learning, educators in different settings. And we ended up doing this for places like nonprofits and all kinds of stuff, where people could get together and increase their capacity to deal with their own climate emotions and with the climate emotions of whoever population that they were serving, oftentimes in educational settings. And that was really fun to work so closely with so many educators and professionals who really want these tools and don't know how to deal with it themselves and want to have ways immediately they can plug and play. The need among educators for tools in this area is huge. And the vast majority of them say stuff like, I want to do better, but I don't want to learn a new skill. I'm not a therapist. I'm worried about opening up this can of worms and not being prepared, maybe doing more harm than good. There's all kinds of really good reasons why educators are averse to even going there. And then, of course, there's the fact of cultural taxation, which is that women, and especially female faculty of color, open up the door for taking care of their students emotionally. And it's already harder than it is for white male faculty. So there's a sense of aversion. There's all kinds of reasons why people would not want to do that. And the book basically tries to respond to that and say, here are all the ways you can not have to be a therapist, where it actually will save more time for you, not add more time. I do believe that there's a win-win-win where if you do it during your class time, if you attend to students' emotions during the class time, or at least if you're more conscious of the emotional hidden curriculum of what you already are doing and what the research says about what you might want to be doing instead, even if that's all you do, the time that you do that in a class time, or you do it in a focused way that's during class time, it actually does ease the emotional burden on faculty outside of class time, eases the emotional burden on students in and outside of class time, and I think does create kind of a win-win-win situation for the planet too, helping these students go do what it is that all these faculty are really hoping that they are motivated to do. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing to think about all the teachers, the faculty, the instructors who are out there who desperately want to support students, but for all the different reasons that you mentioned, just don't know how to enter into it. And with just a little bit of support and a little bit of resources, it's thousands and thousands of students and millions of students all over that would be getting a different type of education and a different type of pedagogical approach and learning the same content, but also having other skills and understandings and coping mechanisms integrated right in. And that is why I think your work is so timely in this moment and so needed and so important to get out there and get integrated and have as many people as possible be able to intersect and think, okay, I can actually do this in the classroom. Like whatever classroom I'm in, whatever I'm teaching, I can actually integrate these skills and understandings into what I do.
Absolutely. And I think it's an interesting moment too, because the majority of people who are teaching these kinds of devastating things are oftentimes in the sciences, and they're also the least, usually, not always, but typically the least equipped to deal with the emotional demands of the content of what they're teaching. And in historically, teaching about climate or teaching about water cycles or whatever didn't have trauma associated with it, right? So it was easy to walk into a class and say, oh, this is not going to be a triggering topic, and I can talk about case studies and my students won't see themselves in the case study. And it was really when I started to realize that the case studies I was teaching were my students' lives, that I needed more tools to, trigger warnings or whatever they are, to say, this is not just something that's far away or something that will happen in the future. This might be happening to some of you right now. And I think that climate educators are probably the last people to figure out how to do all that kind of stuff. We've had, people who are trauma-informed, pedagogy, skilled in fields like Native American studies, even history, social work, child development, psychology, hopefully. There's lots of different disciplines where to be a professor in that discipline, you have to have a little bit of awareness that the content that you're delivering might be personal to your students. And so you might need to come in with some skill there. And a lot of times in climate and environmental education, that has never been the case. And I think this is really an important moment for a massive correction on that, because no longer can we expect our students to come into the classroom and not have environmental or climate trauma be their lives.
Yeah, and I've had so many conversations with different climate scientists in particular, but they're like, well, I don't understand why students are so upset. I'm just sharing numbers and graphs. And because it's not numbers and graphs anymore. The students know they're experiencing it. Many of them are at the front lines. Many of them have seen things, like they're feeling it, they're knowing. And so the numbers are no longer, well, not that they ever were, but the numbers are not neutral. They're not inert. They're like an alarm sound for students who are increasingly facing a future that is unknown, and a future that they feel is being increasingly taken away from them or changed in ways that are not what they want or not what they dreamed about. And so I find it so interesting when people who are instructing in those areas can just say, well, it's theoretical or it's scientific or it's factual. I don't understand why people are upset. It's like, well, because it's not anymore. It's not those theories. But I'm wondering if we can talk more, share some of the great things that are in your book and some of the toolkits. I know there's going to be a lot of educators that are listening to this, and a lot of people who are professors and teachers and really wanting to know how to not only cope themselves, but what you can actually do in the classroom.
Yeah, so I think one of the insights that's come to me in the last few years too, studying this, is that one of the ways that we can make education more transformative is to not prioritize so much content and the sort of what we're filling our syllabi with, but more the process of how we teach. And I think it was Bell Hooks probably that we quote in the book that says something like, how we teach is more important than what we teach. And so thinking about the how of what we teach is throughout the whole book. So you have a lot of people who are coming in from other disciplines, so maybe not even educators to begin with, who are offering some tools. So there's a category of people who are more in the activist setting or in other spaces on campuses that are their tasked more with organizing people to kind of put brains together to come up with a solution to something. That's a very different purpose of a classroom setting than what I think a lot of educators think of their classroom setting purpose to be. But certainly in this moment of climate, many climate educators are thinking, okay, what we're doing is sitting together and trying to figure out how to solve this problem together and equip students with, yeah, sure, the existential and emotional stuff to do that, but also the technical know-how, the political know-how, the cultural know-how to be able to do that at scale. And so there's a real urgency, I think, among educators to make their classes more maybe practical is maybe the right word, either emotionally practical or technically practical or whatever. And so there's a lot of more attention to the how that happens in a lot of the stuff that's in the book. And so, for example, Jessica Crean has a piece in there that's all about using games, how people can use games and the different types of parts of the brain that light up or trigger or access when you use something in the spirit of fun or gamify something versus when you make it very serious. So that's an example of something. What is the role? How can we use games to access different parts of our creativity and emotional resilience that we might not be able to access otherwise? There's an essay in there that's all about the use of poetry to access a different type of part of the brain and a different type of affect to move things forward. There's a piece in there on the role of, I think it's really beautiful that there's no one emotion that's the right thing to be doing in a particular class. And that one of the invitations of the book is for faculty to really assess where their students are coming into things to begin with. Because I think one of the things that happened to me in my big awakening was originally the goal, I felt like the point of education was to berate students with how bad things were and to get them to wake up. Right? Like things are really bad. You can't stay in your isolated cushion, insulated bubble anymore. You have to get charged up and fix these problems of the world and see them more clearly and liberate yourself from the delusions of capitalism. And that's happening before kids are coming to classrooms now, right? And so that was what I think was the shift I noticed. And so the emotional arc of where they come in, how upset they already are about it, how traumatized they already are about it, matters for how it is that you tailor where you're trying to go from there. And so I love a piece that's in there that pushes a little bit against some of the things that I would have been writing about, because I have had students who are from California, who are coming to Humboldt, who are coming to environmental studies. They're pretty self-selected into a high-caring, very worried about the environment group. But if you're somebody who's sitting in the middle of, potato country, Idaho, you're starting with a different emotional set of concerns and tools that you might want to deploy. And so I love that Jennifer Ladino's piece in the book talks about the role of worry and how important worry can actually be for shifting people in her classes around students' emotion, getting them to this place of being able to feel empowered about climate change. So another piece that I love is using photo voice. So giving students the ability to go out into their community and use photo voice to report back those stories. There's all kinds of ways that people use things like somatic practices. So there's a whole chapter on somatics, bringing the body back into higher education. Oh, what a thought. And then there's
that it's not just the brain.
Yeah, these students' bodies are feeling the worry. And so we might want to think about nervous systems when we're doing this work. So there's all kinds of, there's a whole section on justice as pedagogy, which is really important to us. There's all kinds of, I'm just giving you a little sprinkling of that kind of stuff. And they range from essays by students about an assignment that they had to do on hope, a co-curricular thing that happened at Middlebury that a faculty put together that wasn't part of classes, and the argument that she makes that actually having a space outside of classes is very important. There's a person who ran a book club in the UK who writes and co-writes a piece with his students about the role of the book club. Plus all kinds of, just to get the pump primed in your brain about the creative ways that you can do different things. It's really rich and so fun to just, I mean, it's the kind of book that you really can just flip through and say, oh, that looks really cool. That's a cool chart. We try to make a lot of things really visually accessible. And I should say, really important detail is that because so many of the tools in that require like handouts, or if you want to have a graph printed out that's in there, people made the most beautiful visuals to go with what they produced. And so all of that stuff is actually available on an accompanying website. So there's a website called www.existentialtoolkit.com that was curated by everybody, put together little snippets of what was the most important parts of their chapter onto the website, so you can access a lot of this stuff and just sort of shop around, tour the book through a different medium of a website and see if you want to use any of the things or explore it further by checking out the website. So hopefully that was an enticing.
Oh, very enticing. I mean, thank you so much for the work and for the gifts that it's giving everyone, and the very practical, accessible, essential tools that we all need to kind of change our practices, to expand, and also to support ourselves in whatever form of educating or organizing that we're in. Because I found when I was looking through that website and looking through different things, it also applies to myself too, where I'm like, oh, yes, yes, this is, that I need to pay more attention to certain things, or I need to realize how often I'm smothering things, or, where are my sort of maladaptive responses. And so it's a real gift, and I really encourage everyone to access it, because there are so many entry points into it that I think you can really find yourself in it from whatever area and discipline that you're coming from. So I want to end, because it keeps coming up when we talk throughout this show around the importance of somatic practices and mindfulness. And I know that you very much have a lot of training in this, that this is an important part for you. And I'm wondering if you're comfortable sharing kind of the importance of mindfulness for you and how you utilize it in dealing with your own climate emotions and climate grief and anxiety.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Yeah, so it was during the research of A Field Guide to Climate Anxiety that I came across much more deeply the world of mindfulness and the psychology of it, the neuroscience of it. I had this, like I mentioned, a bachelor's degree in religious studies. And so I knew I was really into Eastern philosophy and Eastern religion and philosophy in general, about sort of how do we manage the condition of life and crises of meaning and purpose, finding our sense of purpose, and what is happiness, and how do we do all of this messy humaning, mindfulness really became something that I was very fortunate to find somebody in my community who is a trained mindfulness instructor and guide, and I got really kind of hooked into working with her and her classes during COVID, when I was COVID was not a pretty time for me because of having two little kids at home and sharing a department and trying to teach classes and all the rest, and not to mention carrying the weight of what this all meant in the world. So I really had to, in my own rock bottom moments, figure out what my tools were going to be. And I was very lucky that I had been writing a book where I thought I was putting all these ideas together for other people. So I thought, oh, maybe I should try some of those things myself.
Yeah, we write the book and articles we need.
I didn't know at the time. Yeah. It took me, COVID for me to realize I was really going to need those things. And so it was the combination of doing the research for the book, ostensibly not even for myself, and then meeting this person who became my teacher here, and just getting totally hooked on it, and getting a meditation practice going. These things all felt like they had been, like the soil had been there from my youth when I studied it from pretty much a solely intellectual level. And all of a sudden in my older age, I really felt like I needed it on a spiritual level. So it was all there, and I just kind of need to plug it back in and develop practices around it. And I have, and it's been really fantastic for me. And it's changed the way I teach, utterly changed the way I teach. Every single day I walk into my class and I try to, there's all kinds of ways. I mean, I could list all day long the ways that mindfulness has helped me see the different ways that my reactions are habitual and the stories that I live in, the ways that my biases work to sabotage me showing up in the world the way that is in alignment with my values. So all of this kind of stuff, is against the grain. Our brains are built and trained by society to do all kinds of things that are not necessarily good for the planet, good for our relationships with people, good for our bodies and ourselves, the whole thing. So mindfulness has been really a way to help kind of put the brakes on that and undo some of that. It's like peeling the layers of the onion. It takes a lot of time. It's a lifelong practice and journey, right? But, and it also helps me approach teaching, right? I walk into class always thinking my students' their mental health, they're difficult. They are not okay. And walking into class knowing they're not okay oftentimes brings me really down too. And I keep going through the cycle of what am I doing? I should stop teaching. It's killing me. This feels like I'm working with zombies sometimes. So to recognize the power that I have to shift the tone of their day and of their hour and a half with me, and to hopefully bring some life into what they're doing and to help them build relationships with each other and to tap back in and maybe even do some healing. I don't know if that's even a goal, but it sure has become one for me. I love this bell hooks quote where she says, students walk into my office all the time in a terrible state. They're totally traumatized. They want psychic support, but they don't want therapy from me. What they want is an education that is healing. And I think, that's right. They don't want therapy. They want an education that's healing. And that's what education was for me. So I take a deep breath every time. A mindfulness practice for me with my students is every single day I walk into class, I always think about compassion for them. I really take a deep breath and breathe in all the compassion I possibly can from them for me, and then breathe out all this compassion for them, and just orienting my heart in this soft way that they are walking into the class so burdened and so unhappy and not well. The fact that they're even there is kind of a miracle, frankly. It really helps me. And we just, we have a great time together as a result.
Yeah, I think, it's something that I try to focus on too, is remembering to ground myself, because I had one mindfulness teacher within sort of the Zen Buddhist tradition try to sort of explain that it's if you can be in a rushing river and you can get up just a little bit on a rock and everything is rushing around you, that it's not that you have to provide therapy or healing to others, but you can demonstrate points of stillness and points of groundedness and points of being part of the world, but not ripped along by the world. And that sometimes the best thing that you can do for people is to ground yourself and center yourself. And so I try to carry that with me, even though there are many, many, many moments and days where I don't feel grounded and I don't feel centered, and I feel like I'm caught up in the flows. And I'm also so susceptible to the emotions of others that that is something that mindfulness has been so important for me, because I feel so much. And so being able to try to find that stillness, get into my space, and just create just a little bit of a buffer, not a distance, just a buffer to kind of, protect myself and figure out what's my emotions versus what are others, and kind of show up with that compassion and stillness and some sort of groundedness or solidity that might then support others to be able to find their own spaces too, has been so important for me as well.
Ashlee, it's so beautiful, that description of being on the rock in the river. I love that. I'm going to hold on to that. Thank you.
Yeah, I find I go there a lot, like that, the rushingness, but if you can just pop out a little bit, you can admire the beauty of it, but not get swept into the rapids and the rocks and the,
I love
you have
that.
stillness and agency up there.
And your description of how big you feel and how hard that is really resonates with me too. And I think when I hit my rock bottom burnout with teaching was when I realized that I couldn't make my students happy. I mean, I don't know what egotistical thing in me thought that I was somehow going to come as a professor and save all my students and make them happy and set them off on their course of life and, ready to just, be wonderful and happy. And when I had to let go of that and do the work to recognize that was craziness and that what could I do instead of that was really a mindfulness journey. Absolutely. I love that. Thank you for reminding me of that desire to always want to fix being part of my own inability to be with discomfort and my own egoic work that I've been working with too through mindfulness. So yeah, you hit it. So many.
Yes, I resonate with that too. I feel the need to fix, and I'm working on that. That is part of my long journey of change and self-reflection and mindfulness, especially when we are in such a time of upheaval on every level. Like there's just so much going on. And, it's funny, this ties really well into, I always end each episode with a quote that I love from Francis Weller, where he says, "It takes outrageous courage to face outrageous loss." And I think that fits so much with what we have to do now in these times, in whatever we are, whether we're educators or learners or activists or organizers or, people who really care. We're working on our mindfulness. It really is outrageous courage and outrageous loss at the same time. And I think your work really shows us how we can walk that together, that we have both courage and loss, and that's okay because we're moving along together in with that duality there that's actually brought together in this time.
Yes, and it's a learning process for me too. I have to unlearn all that stuff I've learned, and so we'll do it together, like you said. I love it. Thank you, Ashlee.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being on Second Nature and for taking the time, for the work that you do, for the gifts that you're giving to the world, and for this wonderful conversation. It has been so generative. I really needed it myself as well, to have these discussions and hear these words. So thank you so much for what you're giving me today, as well as all the listeners.
Thank you, Ashlee. Me too. I love talking about this with you, as always.
So it does take outrageous courage to face outrageous loss. So courage, my friends, and until next time, take good care. This was Second Nature, Living with Ecological Grief. Thank you for joining us today for another powerful conversation about environmental love and loss. And of course, the conversation continues. So please make sure to like, share, and subscribe, and visit ashleecunsolo.ca for more information. Until next time, thanks for tuning in, and take good care.